Good evening, good afternoon, whatever day of the week we are. Wednesday, I hope. We haven't met for a month. We've got, hello, thank you. Calling the meeting to order. We haven't met for close to a month now. We've got a couple of big carryover items. So I ask everybody to keep moving as we go through this meeting. Have a full complement, which is a nice feeling to have us all here for after the holidays. I hope everybody had a good holiday and is off to a good start in 2024. First thing is an update on the watershed permit notice of intent application progress. Kristen, I think you dropped 14 of them in.
I did. I filed all of the notices of intent on December 20th. They were published in the Environmental Monitor today. So the enterprise notification is one of the last things that's going out. DPW is handling that. So we are officially filed for notices of intent.
Thank you. And just briefly on that, the timetable going forward is we'll get through talking about watersheds, and then likely in the fall we'll be going for some funding to retain somebody to start developing the watershed permits at that time. The DEP does have a grant program with a very short window of application, but work had to start in 2024. So should you bump across that or hear from another community that they got some grant money and why didn't we? We are not yet at the point where we would spend any money in 2024. So that we hope they're going to do the same thing next year, put a few $100,000 out there to help fund a portion of the watershed permitting planning process, in which case time will go after that money. All right. Second item on the agenda is a continued discussion of the Massachusetts Alternative Septic Systems Test Center revised urine diversion proposal. And I just want to take 1 minute if I can, or 2 minutes, or however many minutes I actually use, because a number of comments have come in, a number have suggestions have arrived in front of us. I want to try to put some clarity on what I think this committee is working on and where this is all going. We are going to get to the point where we're going to have to identify within watersheds areas that are going to require an innovative alternative system in order to reduce nitrogen to the coastal estuaries. In order to do that, we're going to have to put in certain systems, and we're hoping and working on a program to be able to get DEP approval for urine diversion as an innovative alternative system. A number of the conversations and questions that come at us broaden that sort of narrow exercise that we're engaged in. And I'm more than willing to entertain conversation and everything, but I think the working committee, on a very key point, based upon what happened previously with composting toilet, is if we're going to go to the DEP, we need to be able to show what happens if you utilize urine diversion and don't use your septic system. So it's not a split horse or a split baby, however you want to describe this thing. So I think we can all continue to work together, but the exercise of what this committee is focused on is getting to the point that we offer homeowners in nitrogen-sensitive areas a choice on ripping up their entire backyard to put in an IA system and the expense associated with that. So with that, I guess I'm going to open it back up. Steve, you wanted to talk a little bit?
No, I'll wait.
Okay. Everybody, I'm sure, has been looking at this. Okay.
I'll kick in if you want.
Yeah.
Since, a lot of the questions have been coming to my attention directly or via the committee email, and we had asked at the last meeting that all members of the committee, if they had questions, to submit them to me and Amy for consideration and getting some answers from MassTech. Haven't gotten much, just a couple that concerned, what are we gonna do with the urine at MassTech? What would they do with it? Why do we need to store bulk and pasteurize it, et cetera, et cetera? I emailed MassTech last week asking for a response and some detail on that, hopefully for today's meeting, but I didn't get a response yet, so that's pending. A lot of the comments, and I would say well over 90% of them, that had come from the public, and there were a lot, and they were very thoughtful and very detailed. I would say 90% of those questions are answered in the MassTech report, and the working group response and our report to Water Quality Management back at the end of November. So we had given a brief several paragraph report at that meeting and said, here is what the working group has decided makes sense. And I know a lot of people were disappointed that a key recommendation there was subsidies, full subsidies of up to $10,000 would go only to houses that did a complete urine diversion. And people want to do portable devices, QBs, whatever, 5-gallon buckets, and that's fine. And we recommended as a working group that we support that insofar as urine collection, testing, quantifying, data reporting, septic tank pump out and test to see what you start out with, and then quarterly testing going forward as defined in the MassTech proposal to see what the impact is. Obviously, the best data and the data we need as a water quality management is full collection of all urine. Nothing is going into the ground at the site. It is all removed from the site. What MassTech does with that, really, we felt as a working group, was beyond the scope of our mission statement, which was to evaluate the proposal and make a recommendation to Water Quality Management Committee as to how to move forward. So we want to get that best data from a minimum of 50 houses to satisfy the DEP requirement. That will give us then some indication what potential IA credit you could get if you did a full urine diversion, because that's the only thing that DEP would accept. They had said in our earlier in the fall meeting with DEP that they felt urine diversion is a viable technology to investigate under a provisional program. What that would mean is at the end of the provisional program, if we had that 50 household data set for a minimum of 3 years, they would say, yep, you've got an IA system here, and we give it provisional approval, which means it could then potentially be general use application in any area that is going to be mandated to receive an IA. That's the gold standard. That's the ultimate goal. To meet that, it's got to perform and be a best available technology, so as good as the best IA systems out there, and hopefully it would be. But the only way we'll get there is to have that good gold standard data. The working group recommended, and this is a decision to be made by Water Quality Management, that we would also do ancillary data collection. We would support by testing, collecting the urine, removing it from site, transported by MassTech, because one of the questions that came up, well, who's going to haul the urine away? Do we have to hire a hauler? No, MassTech would do that. Part of their budget proposal was a truck and a tank and a technician that would collect the urine. So if somebody wanted to do portable devices for our ancillary data collection, they would have to have, again, this is our recommendation, a minimum of a 50-gallon storage capacity, because MassTech can't go there every 3 days to bring a couple of gallons of urine back. They would test it, they'd test the tank, they'd see, okay, you're taking some amount of your urine out of the system, how is your septic system at the D-box? Taking data there to see, is it major improvement, minor improvement, no improvement at all. Because your gray water and some of your human waste is still going into your septic system, whether it's a cesspool, a Title V, or whatever you got. That's our recommendation, and that is the extent of the subsidy. So people would have to buy their own QB, their own storage tank. But we would remove the urine, collect it, test it, and have data that hopefully will be meaningful for DEP to consider, maybe, but probably not. But I think the best utilization of that information would be in our efforts to restore, remediate our freshwater resources, the ponds, the rivers, and the streams. That, I think, is something the town is collecting around a feeling, hey, we got to do something. A lot of effort's been done by a lot of people, starting with Kim Comart and the Pond Coalition, to bring that to the town's attention and hopefully move forward. So we feel, as a working group, it was worthwhile to make that part of the urine diversion study.
Yeah, if I'm jumping in here just briefly, because I know that our wastewater superintendent can't stay for the entire meeting. This Friday is the deadline for submitting articles for the spring town meeting. Amy and I met on Monday, and Amy has drafted an article for funding at spring town meeting and has submitted it to Ed for his review to make sure that it's in the proper format for being able to borrow. We, at this point, have not put a number in there because we don't have to do that yet. We have to have the wording of the article and the source of the funding identified. And Ed has been given the budget as it shows up on the proposal we have, although.
Not this, that I think you should clarify.
Yeah, not this Ed. So there will be an article on the Springtown meeting. This board will have to take some action over the next couple of meetings relative to a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen around that. When we get sort of Ed, Finance Ed's response back as to the exact wording, I'll make sure it gets distributed to the board and anybody else that, wants to see what the wording is so they understand how it's going. But we're not making a request.
So,
Are we voting on this tonight?
No, we're not, no. The wastewater division is submitting an article for a urine diversion study. We need to make a recommendation on that article at some point.
and how refined does what we're recommending have to be at that time?
I think the issue will be the number, the dollar.
That's as far as we have to go right now in terms of exactly, because I still see some soft stuff in the proposal that we need to refine, and I think be very specific about what we want to come out of that part of
So
it.
my suggestion or my thought on where we are and where we're going, we can either ask Mass Tech to come to our next meeting and go through some of these issues and make sure we're clear on who's doing what, when, and where.
Yep.
Then, in the interim, I think we need to reach into the DEP to say where we're at, and say we're going to submit to them a proposal in front of us and ask their feedback as to whether that proposal would achieve our objective. You know, if we do what what's in the proposal and where we get the data we need, will that be adequate for them? I mean, I think we need to get some certainty on those 2 points. So I would say over the next 2 to 3 weeks, hopefully that gets done, so. Okay. John, I'll go either way.
The only comment I would have is that I agree with Ed completely that my inclination is to follow the November advice from the working committee and the proposal that they made of how we should approach this.
Just a few comments that are sort of, first, a general comment that I think we need to think about, that there are at least 3 possible purposes of this study that different people attach different importance to. One is the one I agree with Steve Rafferty is the most important, is to see if we can get approval from DEP. But we have to recognize that other people are looking at this as education and of the town and marketing to the town. And other people are looking at this as a meaningful survey of the general public in the same way that the eco-toilet study was 10 or 12 years ago. In other words, is there really interest in a disinterested section of people? That needs to be resolved, for sure, or at least understood that it's the first one. And then a more nitty-gritty thing, but may be important in the short term. If you recall measurements of nitrogen concentration in estuaries, there's a lot of what scientists and engineers call noise, even though it's not acoustic at all. Just huge variation in the value. And that's an estuary, which is averaging over a zillion households or hundreds of households. I assume, Amy would probably know the answer to this, that the measurement of a given septic system also has a lot of noise from season, not only, I mean, systematic changes over the seasons, but also season for season over the years. The spring of 2024 is not going to be the same as spring of 2023 for a given household. And if you just have a single baseline measurement of the before condition and a single after installation measurement, you may know absolutely nothing. So somebody who has knowledge of these statistics figures should make sure that the study does that right. And from a timing standpoint, you might want to use some of the 80K, if that's financially feasible, to do an early baseline measurement, especially if you have to convolve that with who are you going to do it to, and have you already signed them up, but you get the point. That's all I wanted to say.
Can I just respond to part of that? I think if I understand you right, Steve, you say, all right, take your initial reading and not just one afterwards, but multiple. And the plan is to check the tank quarterly to take that drop sample
But
of the
also
debox.
before,
Oh, you mean do a?
the baseline. If you have a single baseline measurement, if there's a lot of noise in the baseline,
Okay,
and you haven't measured it at other times, you don't know how you've changed things.
okay, so you're saying like maybe over a year, take some quarterly or every 6 months samples to see how that baseline is evolving before you even pump it out and start with the UDT?
Exactly.
Okay, gotcha.
I mean,
understand what you're saying.
ideally, you do it 4 seasons a year for 5 years ahead of time. That's probably not feasible. But that makes the point, that you have a lot of noise.
This may be a great question to put to the Mass Test Center, where they may have already looked at the variability in septic tanks, nitrogen.
Absolutely.
So
But somebody
that may
has
be-
to
that-
look at it.
Yeah, no, that data needs to
That's a good
either be
question.
there, or we need to create it.
Yeah.
Okay, so,
Not to belabor this, but George Hoyfelder has been spending a lot of time with IAs. They've been we make them at the Board of Health, report to the county. And he's been analyzing all that data from many systems and many types of systems for a number of years now. And they are pretty remarkably consistent, so that, and I think those data sets are pretty much available now.
For a given
John, I
household,
think-
you're saying there's very little noise for any given household?
I think within,
He's looked at, he presented data to me this last week, looking at individual systems.
right,
Okay, because
Not-
if you
not
know
a-
the average weight of everyone in this room, and then I go on a diet, and I weigh me once and I weigh 200 pounds, you've learned absolutely nothing about the effectiveness of my diet.
There's always going to be a range in these things. And when we tried to design a management scheme for IAs for theoretically to use an oyster pond watershed, we proposed to DEP that we would take measurements on systems, not 4 times a year on each system, but each system once every year. And if some systems didn't meet the standard, they'd be offset by ones that were doing better than the standard. So that we would be able to make a case to DEP, by and large, what you've permitted us to do by averaging, say, 100 of these or 200 together, that they're going to perform to the standard that the state sets. So I think this is something that we can deal with.
So, other comments from the
Well,
board?
I concur with John. George published a really nice study of more than 100 systems grouped into various categories. Within systems, they're consistent within a particular household. What he did find was, for example, certain systems that you would have expected all to perform within a certain range varied among households. So sometimes for whatever reason, one household was not produced, there were too much water, not enough water, who knows? And then there were, claims that you could achieve certain milligrams per liter. Some of them met the claims, some of them didn't.
Well,
But it was real-world data collected from, what distinguished it from, for example, the work at Mass Tech. Because Mass Tech, all of what they do is they dose all their systems with wastewater coming from the base. They take it out of a central trench, and it's all uniform going into each of their test systems, versus what George did with this study, which was go to actual actual septic systems in the field. So,
and these are all samples recovered from the settling tank, right?
they're usually at the D box. I think that's usually, or some.
So it's an
just
instantaneous
prior-
sample, it's not integrated over time. That's my concern.
Right, but they took multiple periods. They sampled quarterly or.
Right,
whatever.
but I'm just saying, over 24 hours, if you were sampling just at the D box, you're gonna see a lot of noise.
Well, there's a
Someone runs a
holding tank.
dishwasher, someone
So-
flushes the toilet.
No, but it goes into a holding tank and out to the D box, okay?
Oh,
So
that's
every-
post,
Every time
Okay.
you flush,
It
it goes into the holding tank.
1,500-gallon tank.
okay.
Okay, and then
So it has
somewhere,
been integrated over time.
some depth, slightly
Okay.
below the surface scum, there's a pipe that funnels it into the D box, so it overflows into the D box.
Yep.
Goes out to the leach field.
Fine, as long as it's post settling tank.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, I will. If I may, can I task you, Ed, you may want to get your working group back together one more time between now and the next meeting. I would ask you to sort of put together the questions and concerns on the proposal we have, so we can get them back to the Mass Tech Center. Say, these are the items that we'd like you to come in and get certainty and clarity on, okay? And then we'll make arrangements, Kristen, to put an invite for them. That would be the 24th, and see if we can sort of finalize a little bit some of the proposal. Okay? Is that acceptable?
I think so. My concern is the timing. So if the Mass Tech comes on the 24th, do we still have time to get that proposal revised and sent to DEP before this article needs to be solidified?
I'm going to say, I think that's correct. I had the article timetable.
I guess the other option would be to email Mass Tech with the questions, get their responses and a revised proposal, and get that sent to DEP sooner rather than later. But I don't know whether or not the timing requires that.
No, that's a good suggestion of, yeah. I mean,
As I said earlier, the questions that I have seen, and there's been a lot of them, 90% of the ones from the public are already answered in the proposal as written or in the urine diversion
Recommendation.
working group recommendation to this board from November. I did get a couple of questions from one member of Water Quality Management Committee specific to what are they gonna do with this stuff at MassTech? And I did email that question to MassTech last week. So I should get a response relatively quickly. I can reach out to them again tomorrow and say, hey, when can I hear from you? If anybody on the committee has any other questions that aren't answered in the proposal or the working group recommendation, get them to me right away. And
Steve,
I'd be
could
happy
I
to.
comment?
Go ahead.
I mean, it seems to me, Ed, we're asking for two different things. The last time, you were asking in general about, my understanding was about the November letter from the working group. I think what we're trying to do now for the 24th is looking specifically at the proposal
Oh,
that we got
absolutely.
from
Yes.
MassTech.
Yes, you're correct.
And those are the set of comments that we want to forward to MassTech if they're going to come
Too
to
sweet,
talk
yes.
to us on the
Yeah, well,
24th.
that's, I thought was understood, that was comments from the committee and the general public relative to the MassTech report, because a lot of things were verbalized at our last meeting about the MassTech proposal. But I went through the on-demand recording of that again just the other day to see, okay, what am I missing here? And pretty much what was discussed at that meeting is in the proposal. So I'd say take the time to go through the proposal, not just the working group recommendation, but the proposal. It's only 4 or 5 pages. And if there's specific questions, yes, right away, please, so that they can have enough time to respond, and if need be, revise the proposal in 2 weeks. That's a tight timeline, but I think it's doable, but it requires, get me something quick, or we'll figure that there are no other questions beyond the ones already received.
So, Ed, you think you will meet the middle of this coming week to finalize this, our committee, working group? Are you just gonna,
Well, you know, if, I haven't seen yet anything that needs the whole group back
Okay.
together, because the group, I think, made a very definitive, brief, concise
yep,
report. If there's something that is relative to the report, we could reconvene the committee. It's only a small group, and I think they would be willing to come together quickly. The specifics on the proposal, where you get into some details of, well, what's the project manager do, who's doing what, who's doing outreach, but why is this money here? Those are specifics to the proposal, but either one. I don't think we need the whole working group together again unless there's something related to that recommendation.
I would say when you get to the point where you've got a document ready to go off to the test center saying, these are our concerns, we'd like you to come to the meeting, make sure that your committee gets a copy of that,
Yes, okay.
okay?
This whole committee.
Right. And so but I want to try to answer the question that was asked. The exercise on the town meeting article is you have to have an article in by Friday. There's a whole exercise about that, about who reads it, who reviews it, finance committee, everything else. For now, we've put the number out there that's in the proposal, okay? So I don't think we're at risk of continuing to work on the proposal. This is going to be an appropriation article. We're not obligated to spend all the money that gets appropriated, but we need to keep making the case of what are we doing? Why is the expense in there? Potentially represents the expenses that will be incurred, but it's the work of this committee to continue to refine elements of that, you know, not the least of which is to tackle the subsidy question. But until we're actually signing people up, that subsidy question can be revised upward or downward from wherever it is, okay? But we've had a working framework for a while, and you know, there's a lot of procedural steps on any article.
Yeah, I guess my concern would be to make sure that we have from DEP, yes, for sure, this is gonna satisfy our requirements before we go to, with our recommendations, so that we can literally point to that and say,
Yep.
for sure, this is gonna meet their requirements, and we feel good about it.
What you never want to do is ask for indefinite postponement because you're not ready. But doing everything to be ready, and if, you know, that's the default that
Okay,
we
so
will-
it sounds like we're on track for that, though.
we need to stay focused.
Yes.
How's that, okay? I don't know if I don't know if I want to use a railroad analogy right now. I'd like to stay focused, okay? I'll give him, you had the floor, go ahead.
I agree with what Jordan's saying, but also, I mentioned the noise problem before. There are other nitty-gritty problems. You mentioned the subsidy issue. I just want to make sure that there's at least one meeting that has enough time for this committee to, regardless of how much the working group has gone over it, and in addition to DEP's opinion, for this committee to discuss in detail a number of these nitty-gritty things, such as why do we need to spend money for pasteurization? Pasteurization's been going on for, what, 200 years or something. The Vermont group does it. It obviously works. And there's no point preparing a huge tank of urine for customers before you've done the market study to identify at least one customer. Once you have that, then you start manufacturing your product, if you even need to. And even if you disagree with me, this is not the time to have that discussion now. We don't have time for it. But those kinds of discussions need to take place here in some detail.
I expect that we will talk to the details of urine diversion for quite a number of meetings going forward. Okay? Go ahead, Ed.
I just wanted to raise the question, does it make sense, and along with what Jordan is saying, to give DEP a copy of what we have now from Mass Tech as a preliminary and get any feedback they have, unless, in case they have, hey, you gotta tweak this, this, and this, so that when we get together with Mass Tech, we do it all. It would be delaying our timeline significantly if we revise with Mass Tech, send it to DEP, and then they say, oh, by the way, when we could maybe do it simultaneously, with the understanding to DEP that this is a preliminary guideline for the program we're moving forward on.
Okay. Does somebody want to make a motion to forward the proposal and the working group's recommendations onto the DEP for their input?
So moved.
No, I can't make the motion. Somebody's got to make
No,
the
I
motion.
said so moved.
And I'll second it.
Okay. All those in favor of that approach?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, good.
So we're sending both the Mass Tech proposal and the recommendation from the working group.
You know, for preliminary review, however we do it.
Yeah.
And I'd be happy to sit in on a call with them if it
Well,
needed.
you're going to send it.
Oh, okay.
I forgot to put that into the motion.
Oh,
You're the point person for this committee.
yes.
You know where you're at. Put something together, send it to Amy and I, just before you pull the trigger on it,
Yep,
okay?
okay.
And that will go forward to Amy? You okay with that? Okay, thank you. All right, that's where we're at.
You have no audience question.
Huh?
Audience question,
Well,
if you want.
I guess I'm gonna ask if there's something major that somebody in the audience wants to comment on. I mean, we have a group of questions that came in that got circulated. I prefer not to use up this entire meeting going over each one of those questions, but, you know, Kim, if you want to make a comment?
So, Kim Comart from the Falmouth Pond Coalition. And I guess I'm not, as convinced as Ed is, that the questions that all of us have been asking, are answered in the Mass Tech proposal. So let me just say, on behalf of the Pond Coalition, we want to thank you for your ongoing work on the project. We're aware that you have devoted hundreds of hours collectively over the past 9 months to this issue. You have helped put urine diversion on the radar in Falmouth, and we really appreciate it. We also know you've devoted countless hours to the Phase 1 sewering project, the outfall pipe planning, developing plans for the estuaries, and more. Based on the discussions we've observed over the past 9 months, we believe there was an implicit, if not explicit, understanding among all of you and all of us that there would be a warrant article at the upcoming April town meeting to fund the urine diversion study project. We think that was an understanding. And we're glad to hear from Steve that there is going to be a warrant article. We'll be interested to hear the details of that. We understood also that you would be working out the project design details, making decisions about basic issues such as how many toilets a homeowner would have to replace, what level of subsidy would be provided, what expenses would be covered, what fixtures would be permitted, the nature of support homeowners would receive, the role of Department of Public Works, overall project management, et cetera. We figured you were working on these issues. And again, I would state that I don't think those questions are answered in the MassTech proposal. We've understood that you're going to be working on those. We also understood that you would be exploring funding options in addition to town funding, regional, state, and federal dollars, which we know you've been doing, and that you were engaging the staff at MassTech in that exploration. They're very familiar with the funding sources. They're very good at writing grants, and they're very good at getting grants. So we assumed, and I don't know how much you've been working with them. Finally, we understood that you were working with the town plumbing inspector, Russ Robbins, to secure a state plumbing board approval for UD fixtures that could be used on a provisional basis in the study, because if those fixtures aren't approved, we've got a problem. The FPC, Falmouth Pond Coalitions, we've repeatedly offered to assist in any way we can, sitting in on the discussions if it would be helpful, exploring funding sources, supporting your work with the plumbing board. Several months ago, in preparation for this study, we began recruiting potential participants. To date, we have over 115 households that have signed up to attend informational meetings. Many of these people here are probably in that 115. We provided you with survey data from 60 of those households at your November 30th meeting that showed very strong interest in the project and a high percentage of households that were open to replacing all of their toilets. As we wrote to you recently, we've held off on convening those meetings until there are answers to basic questions, the kinds that are being discussed here and that I listed. It doesn't make sense to bring all these folks together until we're able to answer those questions. So we urge the committee to make decisions regarding the project design, the budget, and the project management, and move this forward as soon as possible. If you decide that 75 homeowners will be required to replace all of their toilets with urine diversion in order to be in the DEP track, so be it. We will work hard to identify those people. If you agree that there should be a non-DEP track, which we hope you will, that homeowners who would be required to replace at least one but not all of their toilets with a UD fixture, we will identify those people. Finally, if you agree there should be a control group of homeowners who keep doing what they're doing now, we'll help identify those people. Every week and month that slips by is delaying the implementation of this study. It's pushing back the date for providing data to DEP. It's pushing back the promotion of urine diversion more broadly in Falmouth. Our waters are in crisis. We don't have time to wait. And again, we hope it's not too late to recommend funding for this project to work out the details and make a recommendation to town meeting in April to fund this project. We don't think it's unreasonable, and we hope it gets done, and anything we can do to help get that done, we're glad to contribute. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. All right. We will continue to work with you, Kim, and others. Let's move on to item 3, if we can, which is a little in-depth look at what may or may not be, how does Bourne's Pond property, whatnot, configure, and what are possible things that would, not to, how does I always say, to perhaps include but not be limited to various alternatives for Bourne's Pond when we get to actually doing a watershed plan.
Kristen Rafton, ScienceWares. So this is basically the same presentation that I gave in November when we started the discussion. What it is potential elements in different scenarios of what could be included in the watershed plan for Bourne's Pond and how those implementations calculate out to achieving the TMDL through the MEP. I'm not going to go through it in intensive detail. You heard it once. But I'll just review that in the MEP, each watershed is actually divided out into sub-embayments. For Bourne's Pond, there are 3 main sub-embayments: Bourne's Brook, with 2 different travel times, Bourne's Pond proper, and Israel's Cove. So those are the 3 target areas where the MEP defines nitrogen removal. These are the numbers that come from the MEP. They have different thresholds for those different sub-embayments, what the present load is, what build-out load is, and how those calculate into what needs to be removed to hit those thresholds. The present total for the entire watershed from the MEP is 4,100 kilograms. If you look at full build-out that was done in MEP, it's 5,000. When you go onto the Cape Cod Commission, their watershed planning tool, they use updated land use data to determine loading to the watershed. They actually have a number for present loading of 6,300 that needs to be removed. But these numbers from the MEP, that's what's in the EPA-approved TMDL.
So which one do we have to use?
Officially, we have to use what's in the TMDL, and for almost all of our watershed, it mirrors what's in the MEP.
Can I jump in here?
Absolutely.
So you asked a great question, Steve. This is, I want to sort of have a conversation around first principles. There's a mathematical exercise that we've had in front of us for quite a while, which is these numbers, the MEP numbers and whatnot, that talk about this nitrogen, and they calculate using different models. The watershed permit program says, you have to work to reducing nitrogen, but if you reduce the nitrogen, but you don't improve water quality, you got to continue to reduce nitrogen. So I keep working from the perspective, this is me, that our objective as the Water Quality Management Committee is to figure out how to create healthy estuaries. Not to
As it
remove
should be,
4,162.
The bottom line, I know the DEP requires us to finally have clean estuaries, even if what they told us to do was not enough.
So as the watershed plans get developed, my expectation is it's not gonna say how to remove 4162 or how to remove 6306. It's gonna say, here is the process by which you'll start removing nitrogen at various stages, and you will keep going until the estuary gets better. So it's not a fixed 4162 in the plan, boom, we are done. It is, we're gonna do this, and when we get there, if we're not seeing what we need, we're gonna do more till we get to a healthy estuary.
Well,
Tom was anxious
okay.
first.
Just knowing what we know about Falmouth, the build-out is going to be impacting Bourne's Brook, right? What build-out in that watershed is going to be, I don't know, pick a number, 90% concentrated north of Route 28. And if we back up just to the outline of the estuary, or the one before that had the, B3, is that the one that
That's
is
it.
our benchmark
Yep.
for the whole estuary? I have a very hard time knowing what little I know about circulation in Bourne's Pond and Bourne's Creek, that much of what we do at the southern end, the broad, shallow reaches of that estuary, is going to have much of an impact at our baseline station. And I think that's what we're going to be running up against in several of our sub-embayments is we've got to do something right there, not downstream somewhere.
Yeah, well, it's a couple of points. One is, we know that you could achieve the goal necessary to restore the estuary and not see the result for a period of years. So it
Again,
lags, so how do you know when you've succeeded?
So the watershed plans require annual water quality monitoring and reporting on a 5-year basis. So it won't
I'm just
end,
saying
it
that
won't
makes
end.
it a little ambiguous in terms of deciding, okay, yeah, we were successful, number one. Number two, Tom's point, in reading through these materials,
But I want to come back and just comment on your first point about this. I do believe that,
we've got our shellfish all clustered
Yep.
down at the entrance.
Well, that's part of my point.
And yet that's a major, what is it, 880?
880.
And 80 kilograms per year, and it seems like the wrong place to put them if you want to get to that, you know. We should be putting them further up in the estuary, whether it's in Israel's Cove or further, you know, I don't know where, but that's something that ought to be thought about, I think. Because they're a significant factor in here, and especially if you're going to do inlet widening, again, they're going to be even less necessary down there, right?
Yep.
So back to, you know, measuring and seeing things. I do believe that somebody's operating budget in Falmouth, most likely the wastewater right now, is going to wind up having a line item that's a real line item for measuring water quality, compiling water quality, reporting water quality. And at the end of 20 years, I suspect somebody's not going to just say, well, we're done, we've hit the 20-year mark, it's over. It's only going to be over when the health of the systems
Sure.
are properly reflected.
Sure.
Okay?
But some thought then needs to go into what constitutes appropriate water quality monitoring. The idea that, okay, we'll just measure, you know, total nitrogen, particulate nitrogen at a particular sentinel station might not be the best metric.
So within the development of a watershed plan, what you're saying is, part of that plan needs to identify what water quality is going to be measured and why,
And where?
And how?
Yeah.
and how. That's fine. That's a reasonable thing to ask to have in the plan.
Okay.
Steve, can I comment? It seems to me, at least in the southern ponds, a lot of them are interconnected. I don't think we can make a great deal of sense about thinking about Bourne's Pond without thinking about the adjacent ones at the same time. And one of the things that I've noticed, if you look at what we did in Little Pond, what we're proposing to do in Tassa 1 and Tassa 2, if you look at those peninsulas, we've pretty much decided on those small lots, the most sensible thing to do is to sewer them.
Yep.
Now, when we get over to Bourne's Pond, and we've got several scenarios that Kristen has presented to us, we say, well, we'll use a barrier here, we'll throw a few IAs here, and we'll sewer sort of haphazardly as we go down the peninsula. I'm just not so sure, and if I were the DPW superintendent in this town, and my responsibility was to plan for the next 30 years, I wouldn't want to be sitting in their place 20 years from now and saying, well, you know, these clowns, in thinking about Bourne's Pond, decided that they could do a little barrier here and they could throw a few IAs in here and basically sort of using the 208 melange makes a great deal of sense. In other words, we have a small city of 35,000 people with a lot of very small lots. And I think we need to think about it, you know, how would we plan this out? We're not just trying to satisfy DEP. As Steve says, we're trying to produce a plan for our future that's going to help us recover the health of these ponds. And at least on the south side here, I think we can't think about them individually. We've got to look at them as a group and how does it make the most sense to approach them?
So if I can jump in here a little bit, John. We've taken the first step of identifying that we're going to create watershed plans for 14 distinct watersheds. So I'd like to think of those as 14 different musical instruments. The question is, where is the score that they all have to play to so that it sounds, it's a harmonic. So I think what you're advocating is that when we fund and when we go get somebody to come in to do these watershed plans, that they're not 14 independent plans, they're 14 plans that meet an
Interconnected.
overall objective. Is that what you're sort of asking for?
Yes,
Because
and, you know, for
I'm
instance,
trying to work through this exercise for what should be in the scope of work.
we
for
may
the watershed
decide on
plans.
the western side of one estuary that we need to do some sewering. but it would make very much sense as we think about that. On the eastern side, we should hook that up as one unit, even though it crosses a watershed. In other words, when we think about where are the blocks that we're going to want to deal with, they may cross over from one watershed to another. And I think that's sort of the way we need to think about them.
That goes to an issue that we didn't address, isn't being addressed here, but, and I wonder if it ought to be, which is, yeah, if you brought the main and everything down here and you've got, you know, you're only doing 38 homes, doesn't it make sense cost-wise? There's no cost analysis. And even though we probably can't get down to the penny, it seems like we ought to be doing some ballpark.
Yeah, I would think that that's
as
part of the
part of
watershed
this
plan.
plan.
But I think the question on the table right now, I'm going to try to frame this. Are we going to go out and find somebody to help us create 14 watershed plans and then make sure that those plans work together? Or are we going to develop some other plan and then make the watershed plans fit into that other plan? You know, it's a case of where do you start and where do you end? Do you start with watershed planning and then say this is how it all fits together to then develop a construction program out of that? Or do we say, you know, spend a period of time at the start of this exercise, as John says, how do the things interrelate on that southern boundary? And then when you get into the watershed plan, say, this has to fit in this way.
Well, I think DEP has sort of demanded that we produce independent watershed.
They
plans.
have. At the end of the day, we have to
And
produce
so,
that.
but that's simply how we report to DEP what we plan to do. But we need to think of them as an integrated set.
We need to look at them all, some intelligent entity, which is usually an individual, not a committee, hence the
That's for sure.
classic joke about camels and horses, has to come up with something that involves all the estuaries. And it really doesn't matter how they do it, that's up to them. Then the committee and/or other intelligent entities looks at all of that and tries to make a fool of them, so, in order to make yourself look good. That's the incentive system, right? We don't get paid.
So
I
again,
think we've sort of done it already in one sense. We've identified what the tools are, right? They're gonna be shellfish, they're gonna be IAs, they're gonna be sewering to some degree. And so the tools are here, it's just how to allocate them within each site that we're debating, or that Kristen's trying to come up with.
Right, what you have in front of you is different elements that have been discussed over the course of the planning stages. The 300-foot boundary, the shellfish, and to your point on does location matter? Probably, and that's why that third scenario has increased sewering to basically compensate for that shellfish, because I don't think that far south it's gonna have an impact in the north. You need to look at where your impaired areas are, look at your MEP for what level of nitrogen removal the model says you need to determine where your implementations need to go.
Well, I think more modeling could be done, for example, to identify the impact of shellfish in different locations. But then the one other question I had related to IAs, and, you know, for example, if you cluster them all around Israel's Cove here, which is what, scenario B, do we know that all those lots can accommodate an IA system? Because, you know, one thing that's certainly true on some of the lots in the Little Pond watershed is they're tiny lots, they're too close to the water table, they might not be appropriate for siting.
So the point of that was looking at the MEP number, Israel's Cove has a removal. So using the most conservative, which would be IAs at best available nitrogen technology, the 10, can you get to the base number that we're told we need to? Whether they fit on the lot or not, the answer is no. Not at 10 milligrams per liter based on the actual water use data for those homes and doing the nitrogen reduction the standard way it's done, you can't. You can't get there with IAs.
But you know, you've got IAs as a portion of the answer. And I guess I'm
So-
questioning whether
That
whether
gets
you're
upgraded to
overestimating.
sewer.
It might only be
Right.
70% effective in that area, because only 70% of those lots can
So
actually accommodate.
again, trying to help the folks, no, let me finish.
Maybe it's too much in the weeds.
No, these are the sort of things that we want to surface by saying, a question that needs to be answered as we have somebody start preparing watershed plans is, you know, what are the lot limitations for installing an IA? That's a reasonable question to put out there.
Okay.
And that, through some GIS mapping or whatever, may turn around and say, oh, this is an area rich for IAs, this is an area poor for IAs, okay? But that's a variable that needs to be included in the quote scope of work. Part of this is to go through these estuaries and surface these things out, the concerns.
What's even more fundamental about the IAs is, if you look at that, what we still have not developed, when we worked on using IAs as a model in the oyster pond, we proposed to DEP a responsible management entity that would manage those 250 IAs. So all of a sudden now, the town DPW commissioner has got, instead of one sewer plant in West Falmouth to manage, she's got 250 individual sewer plants which have to meet the specifications which DEP lays out to us. And what we still have not, and the Mass Tech now has a proposal to develop a management entity system. We haven't seen that yet, and we haven't certainly gotten it approved by DEP. But all of a sudden now, if you decide you're going to deal with a big area with IAs, that's a management nightmare. And as we begin to do a cost analysis, does it make more sense and is it more cost effective to simply sewer than to pay for IAs and have that huge management nightmare? So those are the kind of things, and this I think is a really good example about what I was just showing you. We're talking about Bourne's Pond here. You see we've got blocks. In this proposal, there's an IA block, and then there are 3 sewered blocks. But what we then haven't considered about is what happens to all those little small lots on the eastern side of the pond. And if we go back to the slide that Kristen showed us just before this, where we looked at what we had done, that slide, all of a sudden we don't have little blocks all over the place. We've sewered Little Pond. We've got Tassa 1 and Tassa 2, where we're not doing little fudgy things all over the place. We're going in and dealing with it as a unit. And I'm suggesting that we need to think about the other ponds in the same way that we've thought about Great Pond and Tassa 1, Tassa 2, and Little Pond.
Can I speak to John's issue and Steve's musical efforts? Let's bring in the kettle drums and model exactly how many lots we'd have to sewer, assuming sewering's going to remove 80% of the output. That's a ballpark figure, isn't it? 80% that sewering's going to capture from those lots. And let's look for each watershed and use that as one extreme case. And think about what we might be able to accomplish in 12, 15, or 20 years as we move eastward along Route 28 and use that as one end of a spectrum of approaches we can take, continuing with John's idea that sewering is good and we know it works, and it would be at least an idea to use as one end of this discussion. We don't want to sewer every lot south of Route 28, but let's see how many lots under optimal, and we'd have to get into Amy's stuff here in the engineering and all of laying out the collection and the lift stations and all the rest of that weedy stuff that you get into with these collection systems. But why don't we use that as one I hate to call it a starting point, but I don't want it to be the ending point either. But just in the sense of figuring out what might be done in each of these watersheds.
Yeah, I'm just writing down things that are gonna be like scope questions.
Yeah, good,
Okay.
yeah.
So here's one other, just in thinking about the cost that occurred to me. So if you have brought the, the mains down to the peninsula and you're sewering 50 homes or whatever it is, the incremental cost of, and this is really a question for either you or Amy, of adding another 20 homes or whatever it takes, must be less, right? Because the big work was getting the main all the way from the wastewater plant down to the peninsula to begin with. So when when we compare, what would it cost to put in an IA system? That might be an extra 30 or 40,000 per lot on top of the cost of a standard Title V system. So maybe 50 per lot versus the incremental cost of just bringing the wastewater line down a little further and capturing a few more homes.
Yeah, I just want to, the TASA 1 project costs have a fairly significant cost component for a pump station and a force main, in which the expectation is that that force main and that pump station are sized to get the flows from the subsequent peninsulas coming down through this area, okay? Like everything, basically, on Little Pond, if you will, gets to other existing pump stations downtown, okay? And then it gets pumped up to the plant. TASA 1 starts a whole exercise marching down to a quoit where it's going to be basically a sunk cost out of the TASA 1 work. Correct me if I'm wrong, Amy, but we don't expect to put multiple force mains from each peninsula. We're looking, that's one of the items in the scope of work that's just been developed and is with the engineer to, size the pump station, size the force main in such a way that we can accommodate a fairly large range of flows in the future. So the incremental cost is just going to be lateral sewers or
Right.
E1 stations.
Right.
And
And
we'll,
this, what you're saying goes to John's comment, which is, we need to think of it holistically. And then maybe present the plans watershed by watershed, but.
okay, yeah.
Steve?
Well, I'm gonna
I
give
think
Ed a shot.
what you're saying, Tom, is plan and try to figure out what's a worst-case scenario. If we had to sewer
Right.
every blessed lot in that peninsula,
Well-
are we sizing our infrastructure, force main, and lift stations adequately, so in a worst case, if IAs and all that falls apart, or on a cost basis alone, because of the monitoring cost, John, the installation cost, that it becomes more economical to sewer, then let's see what's that worst-case scenario and plan accordingly.
Well, I'm not thinking in terms of necessarily hitting every residence in every peninsula. I'm thinking in terms of how many residences would we have to sewer to get our reduction that we need to get?
Right.
Right, so that's,
Yeah.
that to
That's
me,
probably gonna be damn near every one of them, because, okay.
well, yeah, in the present case, but as I said, this 800-pound gorilla we've got that's right around the corner in the hall waiting to jump into the living room is the build-out north of 28. And we're seeing this unfold already in Great Pond because our modeling says that the Coonamessett River supplies about 50% of the nitrogen coming into Great Pond. And Chris Neal's number from the last few years says it's way above that. A safe estimate would be 2/3. I wouldn't be surprised if 3/4 of the nitrogen. And we're gonna do TASA 1 and TASA 2 and put a Band-Aid at the site of the wound, but we're not going to be solving the problem that's way upstream in the whole watershed, running all the way to Sandwich eventually. And I think some reason we have to work around that too with these others, because there's not any real, it's a scaling issue, but it's the same processes going on in each one of these watersheds in terms of more production north of the highway. Anyway, I'll get off
No,
that.
well, I think everybody's trying to make a certain point at various things. And some of these are either in the works or can be done relatively simply.
Right.
If you wanted to say, and I'll go back to your first slide where you've got a Cape Cod Commission number, whatever the big number is there, right? If you want to, Kristen's got water use records
Yep,
by parcels in areas. Kristen could fairly easily say, if we only sewered, how many parcels would we have to sewer for 6306? That's an easy thing to do.
that's what I think it is.
That's an easy thing to do. And that's a flow number
Yep.
at the end of the day. In the meantime, where we are with GHD right now is they're working off of the, sort of the older plan a little bit of where the sewers were going, which didn't have any options of IAs to reduce the sewer. And so they're sort of already working with the numbers that are close to that 100%, but it's worthwhile to run the exercise and double check, particularly for the southern peninsulas right now. Would we have to sewer 65% of all the lots on a peninsula if everything else didn't work? You know, I think that's relatively straightforward,
That's
correct?
my thought too.
Right?
I agree completely.
So that could be something done
Yep.
that was available as a block of information to whoever then has to create a watershed plan.
So the other big difference, if I can cut in, is previously with the CWMP update, the planning was targeting this number. It wasn't targeting in specific locations.
Right.
So like for Bourne's Pond, you have the same issue with Great Pond. You have a Coonamessett removal requirement, you have a Perch Pond removal requirement. So that's partly what this approach, just looking at, the 30,000-foot view, how it's one of the considerations that we skipped over and didn't talk about of where are you putting those implementations? Are you just trying to solve the equation for the whole watershed and put shellfish down at the inlet where it's not going to get the reduction you want? So there has to be thought put into location specifics as well.
So, Kristen, that was a question I actually had was, is there now a DEP requirement that we meet those loading numbers in specific sub-estuaries within?
There's
There is
not.
There is not.
Okay.
But back to what I was trying to make a principle before. I would suggest it's this committee's position, unless that we're looking to create healthy estuaries. And in order to get to healthy estuaries, the plan has to deal at the sub-embayment level. It can't just deal in the whole watershed.
Yeah, well, I don't know if that's true.
The TMDL reports basically regurgitate the MEP reports. So they do have it broken down by sub-embayment, but it's not a specific. The specific is that Sentinel station, that B3 in this case. So, but it doesn't say you have to meet it in every sub-embayment.
And then I guess, just generally, the way I've been thinking about this, as I've been sitting on this committee, we're gonna sewer the peninsulas, and we're gonna use IAs in the upper watershed. That's kinda how I've been thinking about it. And the IAs in the upper watershed are areas where you're not likely to sewer because the homes are further apart, it's too far to bring the force main, et cetera. And we can get supplemental removal there if we're not achieving our goals. So that's sort of a generic way I've been thinking about this, and this is quite different. What you proposed is piecing together all these little fixes in different spots.
Patchwork.
Yeah.
Because
just not sure
in
it's
some
sufficient.
instances, so you can see it on this map, Perch Pond, your Perch Pond area, your LT 10 time, looking at where those boundary lines are. Implementation high up in the watershed, your attenuation that you're gonna get, if you're moving through any freshwater bodies in that, where are you getting the biggest bang for your buck makes a difference too. So that's another consideration in there.
Potentially, yeah.
Steve, I just had
Okay,
one
let-
other thing.
I'm gonna give Steve, he's had his hand up politely for quite a few minutes. And I'll get you next.
I want to say something that I think is a bit of a summary. First, going back to John's original point, I don't like everything John said, but the original one makes a lot of sense, about the integration of the different plans. I think that what that tells us is that there has to be a sufficient length of time, like at least 6 months, between finishing the sum of all 14 plans to a fairly finished point and between when they're cast in stone, so that we can all look at them and say, look, the dummies that did Plan 13 and 14 didn't think of combining them with a single sewer line, or something like that, where we might be the dummies. And that's all I'm saying about that part. But then, as far as the alternatives, shellfish, IAs, and PRBs, I think we have, I almost want to say, been dishonest about it. We all agree that the shellfish, to do any good, can't be down at the mouth of the estuary. So I don't really want to see them on a map at the mouth of the estuary again. And I think there's politics there, is that it's fun to tell the enterprise, and thus the people of Falmouth, that wow, and everybody loves oysters, they don't do any harm, and they can help us save money on sewers. Hey, Tom and Chuck and all the good oyster people, go and do your oyster stuff. But we're not really paying any attention to whether it's doing any good to clean the estuaries. I mean, of course it does some good, but whether it's doing enough good for us to take credit for it. And as soon as possible, we should get together with them, or some subgroup of this, and say, where are these going to be on the maps? And then, from then on, either say, the shellfish people demand that they're down at the mouth, so we have to forget about it. It's fine for them to be there, they're not doing any harm, but they're not doing any good, so take them off our list.
So the
We can't take credit for them.
The locations on the map are the result of the townwide shellfish survey that Chuck did over the 3-year period. So those are all the polygons that they surveyed that they found would be suitable. For Bourne's Pond, these are actually quahog areas. Those aren't oyster areas.
Okay, but all I'm saying is, if we all know, I mean, Ken was being diplomatic. I think we know they don't do any good down there. So I don't really want to see them on a water quality map again in those locations. Or at least I don't want to see them in a chart if that's where they're
Well,
located.
people can grow shellfish there, but
Yeah, I'm not,
maybe don't
yeah,
count
but
them as.
we can't
Right.
take credit for it. And as far as IAs, I've been on this committee long enough to know, there was a time when IAs were the great savior that was going to save us from the cost of sewers, and that it was obvious that they were cheaper than sewers. Now I hear it being said, well, because of the monitoring and the multiple management entities, they're almost as expensive as sewers, or maybe even worse. Well, that's not estuary specific. It is a little bit in terms of the cost of the estuary and whether you're above 28 or not. But we ought to agree on what the cost is and whether this management entity business, as John's saying, is some sort of qualitative, insurmountable problem that just rules them out or not. And then use that figure that we agree on to go into the plans. And the same with the PRB. It's one of these things that sounds neat because the town pays for it, individuals don't have to pay for it, it's hidden in the ground, it's just wood chips or olive oil, and
Olive oil is expensive.
but it really is industrial olive oil.
Yeah.
It's soybean oil.
So, okay. And,
Don't tell the olive growers that.
and the batting average for the engineering of these systems by really good people, where the cost of the engineering was colossal per household, is not a good batting average. You know, the people in New Orleans got it as wrong as they possibly could at 90 degrees. And here we underestimated the flow. Are we really counting on the PRB to fix something, or aren't we? And those 3 decisions on the IAs, the shellfish, and the PRBs should come early in the process. That's all I want to say.
Can I attack your proposed shellfish ban?
Just hold off 1 second.
Oh,
'cause
sure.
The lady to your
Oh,
left had her hand up
sorry.
first.
Yeah, I mean, this is
kind of a separate piece that I think we should add to our scope of what to consider, so maybe Tom should.
Well, I was gonna.
If you would like to yield the
I
floor.
will
Yeah,
yield.
all right, just very quickly, Steve, we're forced to be practical. And one of the charges of this committee was to move Falmouth to a position where we could be cleaning up nitrogen wherever we encountered it. And the state is willing to give us credit for the nitrogen that physically leaves the estuaries, whether it's in quahogs or oysters, and that is money in the bank for us. And I agree from a practical standpoint, and that's why I brought it up before. You look at Bournes Creek with the Sentinel Station, halfway up. Nothing we do, almost nothing we can do in the lower 20% or whatever of the linearity of the estuary is going to move things at that Sentinel Station. But I would argue that it's only going to be, I think the rosiest scenarios, it could possibly be 5 or 6 or 7% of the nitrogen we're supposed to be removed could be hauled out in the form of shellfish. And that's if we undergo this tremendous expansion. But I would argue that we need to keep using them because they're poker chips in the game that we're playing with the state.
But as Steve pointed out, I think he'll agree, it's not just the poker game, it's also cleaning up the estuary.
That's what I want. That's why I'm doing this.
Okay. If I stay on the subject, unless,
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah,
yield
sure.
back to you right now, but I want to cover just a little bit of ground, like some history here, Steve. Keep in mind, a couple of years ago, we did a targeted wastewater management plan for the Tassa area, basically. During that time, we started looking at groundwater, infiltrating into parcels at the Augusta and the Allen location. And as we delved into that, what we found was that we had to expand the sewer service area in order to be able to utilize those beds a certain way, which made us start thinking, maybe we should be looking more seriously at the outfall. As we sit here, we do not have an outfall, okay? We do have 2 parcels that we could use for groundwater, for infiltration, but there's a finite capacity at both of those parcels right now, okay? So to say that looking at IAs in the watershed, it's quite possible that a year or 2 years from now, we will know something about the outfall in a way that we can say the marginal cost of sewering 40 more homes versus the cost for putting 40 IAs in is no longer justifiable. But until we have a permitted outfall, we are really boxed in with groundwater discharge. We're really boxed in with
So
groundwater discharge.
you're saying to make a credible plan, we have to think about, okay, what are we gonna do with the
Yeah,
treated wastewater?
yeah.
When do we wanna submit this thing? We have 5 years, right?
We're gonna submit them they're gonna be staggered, because you will, within 5 years of submitting the plan and it approved, you have to write a report on a 5-year cycle. So we broke it up, if you recall, so that we're writing so many watersheds result, the 5-year monitoring plans are not, we're not doing this massive block of 14 plans every 5 years. We're doing whatever, 4
Bourne-
divided into 15.
Right.
Florence
Grouped.
Pond
I know
is
we
the
grouped them.
2028
Okay, so-
is
so-
what the timeline for.
Okay, so this particular thing, we're thinking, is part of a 2028 cluster? Is it just more than just Bourne's?
It was Bourne's, Green,
We can recirculate that thing.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't try to guess it, but
Yeah, so what corresponds to the MEP?
huh?
Well, there's the Great Green Bourne's MEP.
Right, it's not, Great Pond and Little Pond are
Separate.
together because
You were
they
trying to-
both have the targeted plan. So I think it's most of the rest of the south.
Ken, you were
coast.
trying to get to, there's a window of opportunity, if you use a phrase that we
Wow.
kick around, to not lock ourselves in.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think about, okay, so, your point is well taken about, we have to think about how much wastewater disposal area we have and the discharge permit and all that. Therefore, this plan may not be the final plan we implement if we discover in 7 years, we have an outfall.
If things change, again, every 5 years you can come back and say, where are you at? And-
We're modifying.
Okay? But you have to have a plan that works within your existing limitations for both treatment and disposal.
Okay.
Okay?
I get
So,
it, I get it. Yeah, so I guess the main things I was proposing is we think a little more about cost, we include some cost estimate. We think a little more about whether the locations for the IAs are suitable.
So with the sub-embayment, in your plan, looking at the adaptive management, if you've identified this area as a septic improvement area, there's nothing that says in phase 3 of your plan, you decide that you're going to extend the sewer down there, and that's going to become a sewer area.
Right.
So,
Achieves the same removal, yeah,
you would get more removal,
right.
but.
That's right, you would.
Right, so that's for Bourne's Pond. Once the inlet is widened and we do some of the monitoring to see some of the impacts in the actual water column from that, then what's the next step? You know, we have the numbers laid out in the MEP that tell us we should remove X amount of nitrogen. We know where it should come from based on the sub-embayment boundaries. So we know something has to be done here. Whether it's IAs, those don't have to be mandated early in the plan. So,
so
I no longer want to yield. I feel like we're getting to my point here, which is, so in addition to limitations to the discharge, which was also something I felt like we needed to keep in mind, I also feel like we're not discussing the impact of sea level rise as part of these plans either. And so in particular, if you put IAs on the southern, part of your peninsula there, they're probably more likely to get impacted by sea level rise over time and a change in the groundwater depth. So I think a little bit, and I don't know, how in-depth we have to go with this, but I do feel like we should be thinking about how sea level rise is gonna impact our infrastructure and kind of where it's gonna limit us in the next 50 years, because we're starting to butt up against that pretty.
So we've I just feel that we touched upon this a little bit a couple times with the question of, back when the MEP studies were done, they looked at the tidal cycles we had and which inlets would or wouldn't benefit from inlet widening. I've always had in the back of my mind, how do we go back to whoever built those models the first time and put in revised tidal features and determine maybe is inlet widening a better option? Now, people may say, I don't want the inlet widened because then the flooding turns different. But I wrote down here, under scope items to include, is impact of sea level rise. It's a good one.
And it might be a SLAM model, there's some layers out there already that you can use to predict what's gonna be flooded and the storm scenarios and things like that, but
Anybody drive on Surf Drive today?
yeah, right?
No, you didn't.
Nobody
No,
did.
You didn't.
Nobody did.
But,
How come?
I will tell you that our plans to date have excluded the southernmost tips of all the peninsulas for sewering or whatever, quote,
And that's
improvements because of concern about it, yeah.
And that's supposed to be sort of the private homeowner's deal, rather than putting that on the town to try to maintain.
Right.
How you doing? We making any progress?
no. I do have some of the sea level rise maps and corresponding predicted water table elevation changes that were done by the Cape Cod Commission for the South Coast estuaries. So I do have that data, that was done 2 years ago.
That'll make your head hurt.
I know,
Do
that's why
either-
it's not on here.
And a rising tide does not float every boat, right?
No, but I think it's a really good point.
Kristen or Jordan, do either of you know what the error bars expressed as a percentage of sea level rises for 50 years from now? I don't know, so you can say anything, I don't believe you.
There are three values out there. There's one is the low value, one's the medium value, and one is the high-end value. They're in the resiliency
3
reports.
versus 4.5 feet are the two
Yeah.
that I feel like most people use in terms of
So it's what, like plus or minus 25%?
Sure.
You take the average of the two and the difference,
think the numbers could go like from 1.2 feet to 5 feet.
Yeah, they're pretty big.
So the low expectation is 1.2
So it's like
feet.
plus or minus 100% almost.
And then I think the high-end value is around 5, because the Board of Health wrestled with this, John, before you got back on, looking at, should we make the depth of groundwater in certain areas?
We've done that.
Yeah, and I think we used, did we go with like, the board go with like 1.9 or 2.4 or something?
We added another foot.
Yeah, just a foot.
When in doubt, add.
Well, but you can change that again in the future.
Engineer's approach.
But who is it on the Board of Health? It's the geologist and everything.
Kevin,
Yeah.
Kevin is a good source for that, Steve.
Yeah.
I mean, he came in with all that information one day.
So Kristen, where do you want this to move in the next few minutes?
Have we given you any useful input?
I mean, basically, what this was here are the different elements that have been talked about.
Right.
Here's how you calculate the nitrogen, here's where you put them to get rid of the nitrogen, what makes sense for the plan. You know, we talked, shellfish don't make sense to include in the plan,
Well,
and,
at least not in that location.
right, in this, for
And you're
this
telling us
watershed.
that that's all cohogs anyway.
Yep,
That is
So
cohogs
is there
there, that's not
no,
oysters.
why is there no oyster aquaculture
because
there?
there wasn't suitable area determined by MES.
Can I,
They did all their
I'll send us
surveys.
criteria about where you can put it.
can I attack that just for a minute, and I promise to be really, really brief? We are under tremendous limitations imposed by the Division of Marine Fisheries. The oysters are grown, we've determined we've got years of result, do best in floating culture.
Right.
So as soon as you put up there, you cannot put any floating gear over commercially viable bottom. The DMF's criterion is 1 shellfish per square yard. 1. So you have to find areas in Falmouth where there are 0 shellfish before you can even think about it. And this is what Chuck spent years doing, developing these polygons. And that's what we're under. We've identified, as you remember, Chuck, several months ago.
That's because they worry that they'll be smothered by the feces, pseudofeces?
No, they're worried about commercial fishermen's access to that resource.
I see.
Because once you put the floating gear in place, you can't go in. And we've had in the past rotational
I was
things.
gonna say,
Yeah, so, yeah, there was talk of saying a third of the estuary in a given year would be floating there, and then that would be moved somewhere else. But anyway, that's why you don't see any oyster aquaculture proposed for anywhere in Bourne's Pond. Great Pond right now is the spot where we have some
so what
potential.
happens if these systems recover and then they get colonized on the bottom?
Well, they won't be colonized on the bottom because of the physics of the estuary. The places where we're doing this is the places where we have that nice black mayonnaise sulfur-laden mud, which it turns out supports enormous numbers of razor clams, but no cohogs and nothing that's commercially worthwhile. But anyway, I'll get off that, but it's
We're not asking you to do the impossible. We're just saying that I'm just saying we should not take credit for impossible things that you won't do.
well, we're doing it, it's just that the game is structured so that we have to play our cards in that part of the table.
It's being done, Steve, it's how to count it.
Yeah.
Right, and the cohogs in this scenario don't do as much benefit as oysters would in other estuaries. But there's commercial fishermen, there's a market requirement to keep everybody happy for the expansion of the shellfish program. You know, the diggers want more access.
I'm not against oysters. I just say
Right.
don't take credit for it.
The other issue is a quahog removes as much nitrogen as an oyster, but it takes it 3 years instead of 18 months. So that's another return on investment that you have to think about.
You know, in a mass balance sense, it's credit, because if you extract the biomass, that many kilograms of nitrogen is gone.
Right, but if you can only do it once every 3 years,
There's more flushing in your mouth.
anyway.
Right, but it's still inside the system, and it's water that, yeah, so that, you're right, that it's hard to precisely, how much of that water that came in would have gone out in the next time.
We've digressed a little bit into
We
a
have.
conversation about
Yes,
whether or not
and I
oysters and
apologize.
cohogs are of any value. And I'd like to just give a chance to, you just at least finish out what might happen in Bourne's Pond, and ignore anything that's in yellow, Steve. Okay?
So this was the third, so the first scenario had the 300-foot boundary, which didn't get you what you needed in the different sub-embayments. The second one had the septic improvement area and the Fisherman's Cove sewering. The third would be to the point of, do these shellfish matter? The highest nitrogen, the highest impairment is up here.
Yep.
So if you expand your sewering and don't count the shellfish, can you get to your targets on paper with that sewering expansion? Again, Israel's Cove, because that's done just as an IA area for this exercise, you don't get there. But what that orange, that's additional proposed sewering from beyond what was in that original plan in the upper reaches of the estuary to target the impairment, the higher impairment area. Again, if down the line, through the course of the watershed permit, this becomes a sewer area because it's an area where septic needs to be addressed after you've monitored, once the inlet has been widened and other implementations, it has the option to be. This is basically just a draft of what the different phases of that watershed plan could look like. The inlet widening is scheduled to be completed prior to the target date for applying for the actual watershed permit.
Quick update. The town has all of the permits now for the inlet widening, and the plan is to start construction next fall.
At any point, whenever the committee or the town,
And just to stay on that, I got, just momentarily, so I think it's a push to get done all over one winter. But I do believe, coming back into it, it fits in that we can actually see what the effect of flushing is at some point in time. You know, there's a presumption from the modeling of what flushing is good for or not good for. But again, the model was all predicated upon nitrogen data in Vineyard Sound, and the nitrogen in Vineyard Sound concentration. Recent data, John, is that the nitrogen concentration's been creeping up in Vineyard Sound. We don't know whether it's due to temperature or what it is, but, so when the model was run before for the value of inlet widening, it may not be as great as we expect, so, again.
Can you get a ballpark increase over earlier numbers? A few percent, 20%? Do you know?
the Pond Watch data went from, I think MEP, I haven't looked for a couple of weeks. I think MEP was 0.29
Wait a minute, in the sound?
in the sound.
Okay,
And-
now, has Buzzards Bay Coalition got their
Yeah, the
monitoring?
more recent data showing it's at 0.45 or something.
That's Pond
I know, you're
Watch.
shaking your head like you
I don't
can't-
believe it.
You don't believe it? I'm
Right.
just-
Yeah, I don't
I'm
believe
telling
it
you what-
either.
I'm telling you what
But
people are
this is-
measuring, all right?
I compared the Pond Watch data, which is the data from the MEP and that the town pays for every year, so it's taken at the same site.
Right.
So what their data is showing is there has been an increase. John said there was a buoy out for Buzzards Bay Coalition. I haven't found that data yet, because I forgot to
My
look.
point being that with this project that's been dead in the water for a long time, while we're
Yes.
waiting to get all the permits are in, all the comment periods have expired on the permits that have been issued, and the DPW is, going to have bid-ready documents for the fall, is what they're telling me,
Yeah.
okay? Go ahead, Steve.
That's fantastic, that's great. And it just made me think of something. This is not my area of expertise, but get somebody good to think about it. You could do a tracer study in that estuary before and after the inlet widening not with nitrogen, obviously not with something radioactive but with something harmless and unusual in very tiny quantities. And then you would see the pure effect of the flushing, independent of any noise variation. Ken would know more about this than that.
I
noise
bet you he's
variation
always
in the
drafting a
nitrogen.
proposal.
You're saying a conservative tracer, add a conservative tracer and watch. it
Right.
dilute. Yeah.
Both before and after the inlet
But
water.
that's also what, the House Chen model, whatever, circulation model. they were
But
able
if you want a baseline, you have until next fall to do it.
Oh, well, do we
Yeah,
want to
could.
commission that kind of a study?
We could, but I don't know that it does anything for us, because the fact is, they're gonna widen the inlet a certain amount, and when the inlet is widened, the nitrogen concentration inside the bay is gonna be what it's gonna be. It's not gonna be higher or lower. The tracer won't get us a better number or a worse number.
No, it will, because there's noise involved in the amount of nitrogen. Whether the better
Yeah, but-
number does you any good is another legitimate question, but you do get a better number,
Okay?
because you've controlled the amount of conservative
Well,
tracer
you
put in.
get an empirically derived number versus a modeled number.
Yeah,
There's-
so it's a little bit better. I'm assuming the cost is peanuts.
Well, I don't think so.
Says the GOP elephant.
I'm not gonna go back to the DPW and ask them to put a tracer in.
No.
Okay, they're gonna widen it. It's got several elements to it. There's work in Monont Beach associated with the whole project and everything else, so.
You could just suggest it to some student at MBL.
Is there a reason why Little Pond, this is a total digression, inlet was not widened,
Yes,
which was?
Falmouth Heights has the lowest tidal amplitude of any open coastal station on the entire east coast. So you're not gonna flush much when you have low amplitude.
Well, I can tell you.
We're into
it's heavily
digression
restricted.
again, but
Yes,
since
it
we're
is.
here, I'll entertain it momentarily. The two locations that the MEP study said inlet widening would have some net positive benefit was both Little Pond and Bourne's Pond. The decision was made before that the amount of benefit you got from inlet widening compared to the need from all the dense homes up above, that resources would be spent on sewering the area, okay? And that resources would be spent on Bourne's Pond with the idea of finding out if inlet widening got us to what we needed to get to. If the model's prediction of X area gets better, held true, because Bourne's Pond area was significantly greater than Little Pond at the time. Now, that's not to say that someplace on the list of things that happen, you wouldn't say, maybe the next thing to do is to widen the inlet for Little Pond for hydraulic reasons or other reasons as well, okay?
I don't really have much else, so.
Have
that
we beat you up enough?
I don't think we'd be interrupted. No, thank you. You've given us more than enough to think about.
Right.
Okay. I'm gonna go to item 4, if I can. Oh, go ahead.
So I made a list of some, and I'm sure you were too, about all these potential things that we could think about for watershed plans. And I guess, I just don't know, do we need to, we mentioned them, but we didn't make like super hard decisions about anything
No,
like
no,
the
we're not even at the decisions point. We're just trying to, this exercise is exactly the way this has been unfolding. Kristen grabbed an
Well,
estuary.
this is coming up again.
Oh, yeah, there was, oh, yeah.
All right,
She's got-
13 times.
She's got 13 more of them to go.
Well, I just want, like, are we meeting sub-watershed
So,
thresholds? Is that like the goal?
timeline goes like this. We need to sort of figure out what we want to have or want to know through the watershed planning process. But we won't go for money until we go to fall town meeting, okay? So we have from now to whatever day that our article goes in to figure out what we want to know. And then a budget needs to be put together, and then you're gonna hire a consultant or consultants to do this work. So, if you've gathered notes, send them to me, Kristen and Amy, so that, we're continuing to build a list of things that we want to make sure get into watershed plans.
Just real quickly, it would take John Ramsey 10 minutes to figure out what new Vineyard Sound numbers might mean for the dilution factor within the pond. So he's the one that did all that modeling initially.
Got it. We're not-
So put that on the list too.
Yep, that's good, that's all good. Okay. We'd like to get out of here in the next 20 minutes, so I'm gonna try to move along fairly quickly. Item 4 is a discussion on potential conflict of outfall and power routing. And this is, again, from a conversation that I had with Amy earlier in the week, I noted that there are different plans that have been floating around for how offshore wind power may or may not arrive in Falmouth and where it may or may not go. And the route that they put on a map presumes that there's enough room to fit whatever they think they're gonna need, which is not, it's not a single 5-inch diameter conduit, it's big, it takes up a fair amount of space. And so the thought has been, and it's in the scope of work with GHD, for them, on the outfall work, is to identify, an early task is to identify our best route for getting from the treatment plant down to the Heights location that we currently prefer. And then the expectation is we put that onto our GIS maps and treat it as though it's an existing utility, you know, with an elevation and a depth. And if anybody else wants to come through with a gas line, you know, telecommunication line or offshore power lines, this is there for the town of Falmouth, and do not make it so that it can't be constructed or used, okay? So that's it.
Claim the space.
Stake, put your stake down, you know, I mean,
Yep.
become a Sooner. It's what I call the Sooner model. Everybody gets the Oklahoma reference? Okay?
Looks like we could achieve the wastewater treatment by running the power cable right through the center of the sewer line. Have it just
I don't want to be on
fry
that, I
all
don't want to be
the-
on the construction crew when that happens. Discussion on funding opportunities is very brief and generic, but anybody hears of any funding opportunities, please let us know. But wanted to identify that in mid-December, I got invited to sit down with Chuck Martinson, DPW, town manager, and the NRCS, which is the Natural Resource Conservation, help me out here,
Natural Resources Conservation Service.
Conservation Service. So they provide to the Cape a block of money pretty much every year for the purposes of shellfish, salt marsh restoration or enlargement. And there's a third consideration, okay? And they showed up in December to say, you guys haven't asked for any funding, you know, we've got money that we'd like to do, we've identified projects that we think the town should be doing. They give 100% for the engineering. They give 0 for the permitting. Then, after the engineering's done, you can come back in with a real project, and they will fund upwards of 75% of the construction cost. All right? So it's real money, it's real good.
Steve,
Chuck Martinson?
parameters on the amount of money?
Huh?
The amount of money per year, or how would that
No,
be?
no, this is a program that we've not taken much advantage of. We did the
No, he's
red.
asking what, how much are they offering?
How
I
much?
thi-
Thousand, a
I think,
million,
I
a
think
billion?
I think they had 20, I think they had 23 to 28 million dollars in the last
Oh,
year.
okay.
To distribute to projects.
Walk around
When-
town money.
When we heard about Wacoit Landing and some of the stormwater runoff from the APCC work, that's all in the rubric of what they will pay for, okay? So, anyways, we are putting a letter in as we speak. We're identifying 4 projects that we think the town wants to go forward with. Most of these don't directly impact what we're trying to do under water quality management. They might have some secondary benefit. One of them is the culvert up on Martin Road. They want to move that along. There's,
Is that a stormwater or is that a fish passage thing?
I think that's the
I
road going under Martin Road.
I think you'll pick up some of that, because I think I sent you the package of all the, somewhat,
Stormwater
23.
Primarily.
But,
Okay, okay.
but shortcutting quickly, the one item from water quality management that made the list of 4 that we're going forward with, is to look at, ask for engineering money to develop a permeable reactive barrier in the upper portion of the Wacoit watershed, because there is a neighborhood high up in that watershed that's nowhere near where we'll ever sewer. A bunch of small lots, get back to your question of will IAs ever work, okay? So I've asked Ken and Kristen and others to tell me what we need for engineering so we can put it into this letter, with the expectation that we would go out and do the engineering. We don't have to go to construction. You can do the engineering and make a decision not to go any further. And so, again, as the next year unfolds, we'll try to keep our eyes open. But Chuck has been very good about, like, for example, we have, there's a number of projects that have to do with stormwater, okay? And we picked one of those projects was plucked out. I think it's on one of the peninsulas. It's a fairly flat road, and right now there's several catch basins that run to a outfall that go in. And the idea was to put that on there for engineering to figure out, for those of you that drive down Mill Road, you'll recall that a number of years ago, the side of the road all got dug up and infiltrators were put in so the water goes into the groundwater rather than runs down a pipe. So we picked a road that's got some potential to try to get a design together that can eliminate that outfall. And then we'll look at using that as a model for, there's 20-some odd locations along the estuaries. So every one of those, eliminating that stormwater helps to, again, we shouldn't take too much credit for it, but it will reduce some of the nitrogen, okay? So I just wanted to update you.
I always say, I never object to ripping off the granting agencies, only the Falmouth County.
But there are a couple of projects that are sort of creeping along with some NOAA funding sources too. So we're being very careful about some of these stormwater projects and the NOAA funding that's coming in. But this is a program that we just have not pushed to get the money.
Yeah.
And part of it has been bandwidth for people to actually take on projects and get them done. The new town manager is very aware that he doesn't want to overload staff, but he also thinks that we could do our best to get into this program. And doesn't hurt that Eric Turkington is now the vice chair of the organization that passes out this funding.
Oh.
So when he realized where the money was going to and not going to, he worked to set this whole meeting up to get people in the room, because not to fault the way the town functions, but, conservation has their projects, environmental has their projects, DPW has their projects, and maybe we weren't doing a good job of communicating, so now we're back to, at least a couple times a year, we'll get together, talking about what's on, and be getting our act together for asking for money for the next year, trying to build a program that can roll forward a little bit, okay? Kristen, you found something that was out there a little bit, that you passed on to
Oh,
Ed,
the
to look at.
319 non-point source funding opportunity is going to be opening soon.
Yeah, and
So that's something that can be looked at for those.
take a look at that, and if you think we need to write something up or go after something, I'll good to you. I would appreciate it if you take the mic. With you.
Matt Hanley, Thomas Landers Road. Ken Foreman, myself, Kim Comart, and the Green Center actually went to the Southern New England EPA Forum last summer. Southern New England EPA was basically begging municipalities to come forward with programs so they could fund them. They said, we've got this large amount of money that was given to from this administration, president, federal administration, and they actually opened it up to nonprofits because they felt that not enough municipalities were taking advantage of this program. So if the town and I commend you for looking for sources outside the taxpayers' funding for some of these programs. And you can't diminish some of these smaller projects, what impact they make on the water quality itself. It might not be nitrogen, but it's water quality and the fish and shellfish and finfish in those estuaries. So I would like to see this board get prepared for the Southern New England EPA Forum this year.
If you have a reference or a link to it, can you send it to me?
Steve,
Ken Foreman was
that's
there.
SNAP.
Oh, these are
SNAP.
the SNAP grants?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we've gotten those in the past. We have.
We've
Yeah.
had applications in every year
Yeah.
for various things.
Well,
What's
one
the
thing I can
typical
say,
size of a grant?
I've worked in the science field
$100,000.
for, since the early 2000s. I used to work for Merck, Amgen, Novartis, Tufts Medical, and I have a lot of, friends and colleagues that, work in science. And there's one thing I can say is, having a grant writer makes all the difference, because if your grant's not formatted properly, you're not getting that grant.
Right.
So having a professional grant writer pays for itself, because the cost of that grant writer is minimal to the amount of that grant. So if we're not getting them, then we have to find out, maybe we should be hiring a grant writer to reformat it, use the right keywords, and make sure our grants get on top of the pile.
Yeah, no,
Thank you very much.
We've gotten some, and I know that the new town manager, in my conversations with him, has noted that he finds it a little unusual that the town doesn't have a grant writer. Okay.
Is urine diversion a possibility for them?
Yeah, I think that might be, but the thing about SNAP is they come up with very specific criteria. So
Each year, yeah.
in this particular year, we're funding things that address these 5 bullet points. And if urine diversion's a great idea, but it's not one of their bullet points that year, you're not gonna get funded.
Fair enough, but we should at least look.
Oh, yeah,
did.
we
And we
looked.
do every year.
She's
We
come
look.
before us and said,
Every year.
this, I mean, I can't remember the meeting, but she came in, she said, this is the criteria for this year.
Isn't that how Matt got this? Did Matt get it
Matt,
for SNAP?
Yeah.
the Shorewood PRB was SNAP.
Was
That was
SNAP,
originally
right.
SNAP funded.
So the list this year, could it be urine diversion?
It did not include your.
I don't know about SNAP, but it might fit under the 319, and that's why I sent it to Ed. There is a webinar coming up on the 24th. And I know I've looked into 319 for things related to Mill Pond before. So it's how you contort the project to fit whatever the priority criteria is for that call.
I'm gonna ask, when we get to the next meeting, if you could just double check the timetable for when that information usually comes out, so we have it in front of us.
SNAP is usually February or March.
And there's another program that I came across that's, but it's for environmental justice. And it's, again, very specific, and I tried to bend my mind to anything that would fit with what we're doing, but I think we know it. Yes, ma'am. You just need to go to the microphone.
I'm Maggie McGaw. I live at 16 Little Lane in Waquoit. I'm also on the board of Citizens for the Protection of Waquoit Bay. And I'm interested to hear if you are in any position to speak on this, about the process of finding the company or the individual you will be engaging to create these watershed plans. And just as a little bit of background, at CPWB last year, I think it was last year, we engaged Scott Horsley to bring his students in from his graduate program at Tufts to do a study of the Quashnet-Municus River to identify specific spots along the waterway that are having a negative impact on the nitrogen load in the lower Municus and then emptying into Waquoit Bay. And we engaged Scott in August, and he and his students had a plan by the end of the fall semester. And I'm not suggesting that anything like that would be, of a scope and a level of detail appropriate for what the town needs to provide to the DEP, but it does seem like you are wrestling a lot with the question of the scope and which order to do things in, and I just wonder whether somebody like Scott or Scott himself would be somebody to consult with and conceivably enlist his incredibly smart, active, engaged students to, provide you with some very low-cost advice about where to start and what to include.
I'd like to, if I could just respond to your points, a couple of things. First off, I currently have, this board currently has no funding source to do anything, but we also have structured how we want to do the plans in terms of a timeline, which is the notice of intent, information that went in, and that'll, if it's not already posted today, it will be by the end of the week to the Water Quality Management Committee's website. But what we're engaged in now is this committee trying to understand a little bit of the range of things in these 14 plans we've got to create. So we can create something that reads like a request for proposals, okay? And to establish some sense of a budget of the level of effort that's gonna be required so that we can put it into an article at next November's town meeting for funding. The Horsley Group has done work for the town on many projects. I would not be surprised if he wasn't one of the respondents to the request for proposals and might offer some creative ways of gathering data or information, so.
Okay.
That's where we're at, okay?
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we get a version or a copy of your study?
Absolutely.
I would love to see that. Thank you.
Yeah, get it to us, and if it looks good, we'll put you on the agenda and you can make a whole presentation.
Yeah.
I wouldn't make a presentation.
And just to close the loop with you, I've been in conversation, I believe his last name is Otis?
Yeah, Rick.
Yeah, I've been in conversation with Rick around issues, and he's pointed out his background in the federal government and where there might be some funding sources there. We're in the nascent stages of developing an ongoing relationship with our state senators, our U.S. senators' offices on what the town's doing and asking them to help identify anything that we could benefit from, okay? So, all right. We've got 1 minute to finish the agenda, okay? Shorewood Drive.
I sampled in December. I didn't get nitrate sample data back yet. I got TOC data. There's still carbon in the upper portion of the 2-year side. That's the only side we sample anymore. Based on conductivity and all of the other field parameters, the PRB looks to still be functioning.
It's like it's still working years after. It's like the Voyager spacecraft. It's still
Is
spending
there
back signals.
oxygen?
Not where it's functioning.
Okay.
All right, unless there's something extremely pressing, I would entertain a motion to pass over reports of members and staff.
So moved?
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. The minutes of the prior meeting. Tom, you had some edits?
Yeah, I think,
They look good?
I thought they looked great. They're good.
Does anybody have any comments on the
Yes.
minutes?
I don't usually do this, but on page 2, the bottom paragraph, it refers to somebody who I think was me, and I'm not asking for my name to be put in there. Someone else can take credit for it if they want to. But it listed 3 things as relevant, I don't have it in front of me, relevant parts of the,
Here, it's at the bottom of that page where your thumb is right now, I think. Is that the section?
yeah, it does have my name, okay.
And I spelled it right.
And the third is to address pasteurizing the urine. It implies that I thought that pasteurizing the urine was a good idea, which is the opposite of what I thought.
What would you like it to
I was
say?
trying to imply that there were, the first two, the main objective, convincing DEP, and the second objective, figuring out what Falmouth residents are willing to do, was reasonable. But pasteurizing and other technical things like that made no sense. I know you don't like non-diplomatic things in there, but sometimes they get said, and it's the job of the minutes. To report them.
Any other requested corrections? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes. with-
Also move.
Second?
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, anybody want to make a motion?
Yep, I'll move adjournment.
Anybody want a second?
Second.
Okay, I'll make,
Right.
and to remind everybody, the 24th, 2 weeks from now, same bat time, same bat channel.